Another day, another great bunch of videos read around a cozy fire while the rain comes down outside and we all seek a little bit of warmth while we try to dry off. Welcome to Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get you guys warm and dry and listening to some great stories from yours truly today, Dr. Plague. Today's theme will be homelessness, or the creepy things that sometimes happen when you're homeless. So, let's get started with an oldie but a goodie. We'll hear a tale from a longtime veteran of the endless highway, a real jack-of-all-trades when it comes to living rough, and about the sounds he heard from the woods.
I've been living rough for about a year now. It's not as bad as you'd think. Not really. When COVID hit, I lost my job. The food industry got hit pretty hard, and the catering business I worked for had suddenly closed up shop. When I couldn't pay my rent, my landlord put me on the street. I suppose I could have gone and gotten an assistance check, but I met some guys at a soup kitchen I was crashing at, and they invited me to come live rough with them. For the last 9 months, I've been traveling from town to town with a great group of guys who've been homeless for years. I know this makes me sound like a tourist, but it's really not as bad as you'd think. I've been enjoying a freer lifestyle than I ever had before. I travel around with 4 guys, and they keep an eye on me, and I keep an eye on them. They call me Kid, and I'm lucky to have fallen in with them, all things told. Travis is a vet from Iraq who couldn't seem to live in an apartment after spending 6 months in an Iraqi prison. He's a rough guy, but very protective of his squad, which I guess is us now. Conley is more like a classic tramp. He's old enough to be my granddad and seems to get by mostly on panhandling. He can be real charming, and he's amiable enough, whether he's drunk or sober. He's more than happy to share what he makes with the rest of us, too. Then, of course, there's John. Of the 3, I think John is the one I like the best. He reminds me of my dad somehow. He's tall and thin with bushy eyebrows and a thick salt and pepper beard. He works as a handyman sometimes to make money, and he seems more than content to keep a protective eye on all of us. Despite Conley being 15 years older than him, you can tell that he thinks of all of us as his kids. He was very protective of us, and I spent many nights around a campfire with the 3 of them. John was always at the head of the fire, like a father at his table, and we often told stories as we hunkered around our camp. On the night in question, we were telling scary stories. We had camped in the woods off the interstate, far enough in that our fire couldn't be seen from the road, and we were eating food we had all bought and telling tales. Conley was talking about a ghost story he had heard in Denver, and Travis told us about a ghost soldier spotted around the barracks he was assigned to in Iraq. I told one of my many creepypastas I'd read during my other life, and finally we looked to John. John was eating quietly through it all, and now seemed intent on continuing his dinner. "Your turn, Dad," I said, using the teasing nickname I had fixed on him. "I don't really like to tell stories," he said, and his voice had a hollow tone to it as he busied himself with his can of stew. "Come on, John," said Conley, already sounding like his dinner was affecting him. "We all told a story. Now it's your turn." I was sitting next to John at his right hand, and I saw him darken a little as Conley prodded at him. "Easy, Conley. If John doesn't want to tell a story, then he doesn't have to." "Fine. You guys want a story? I got a story for you." John sounded a little mad, and Conley raised his hands in a placating way as he told him it was fine. "It's a great story. I think you'll love it. Gather up, kids. It's a real doozy." He reached over and took the bottle of rot gut from Conley, taking a deep swig before he started. He sounded flustered, out of sorts, and I kind of didn't want him to tell it now. Clearly something was going on here that was outside the norm, and I was afraid of what might happen after his story was told. Want it or not, though, John began. "It was midnight, just like tonight. The August wind was creeping in from the east, cold and hungry, as the 2 boys sat around their campfire, munching their dinner of beans. They didn't have the luxury of a home or a hearth, only having the other in this world. Their parents had cast them out, not having enough money to feed them any longer, and the 2 boys had been riding the rails, seeking their fortunes as they tried to make it day by day. The two boys had managed to beg enough for a can of beans, and as they sat around the fire, they listened to the bubbling inside as their stomachs growled and their mouths watered. They hadn't eaten in 3 days, you see, and the smell of them beans was enough to make them ravenous. They sat closer to the fire, basking in the smell of the cooking beans, and that's when they heard the cry. The two huddled close to the fire, shuddering as the howl glided up between the trees. Their campfire wavered under the torrent of wind, and they hunkered close as they tried to keep alive. They blocked it with their bodies, feeling the icy bite of the wind as they tried to cook their dinner. The howl growled across their shivering skin, and the two boys wondered if that would be their last meal. The beans began to boil over the lip of the can, and the older boy's threadbare glove to allow him to slide it from the flames. He poured the beans into a tin cup for his brother, gritting his teeth as the heat became too hot even for his gloved hand. As he poured, he could feel something stalking behind them. It had smelled their food and came to look. If they were lucky, it was just a little cat or a mangy dog that would leave if they shouted. If they weren't, then the older boy would stand against it while the brother ran. Either way, the two would eat a few mouthfuls of beans before they died. He wrapped his scarf around the can gingerly, holding it by the tatty garment as he tipped the scalding beans into his mouth. They burned his tongue and blistered his throat, but his hunger was too great to wait. His brother moaned in pain as he did the same, the two of them feeding their bodies as the scalding food nourished them. And all the while, the beast howled and stalked behind them. Neither boy looked into the dark woods. They knew that something stalked them, that something wanted them desperately. But they thought that if they ignored it, it might just pass them by. As it moved around them, the oldest could see that it was like a dog. It capered about on all fours, its teeth bone white as it grinned at them. It stalked their little fire, circling the pair 3 times before stopping. It stood between the two, its arrow-shaped head pushed in close. The two boys ate, trying to ignore it, not wanting to see it, and hoping it would just go away. When it spoke, the younger of the two began to cry in terror.
You come into my woods, bring your destructive fire, and then you don't even offer me a proper gift. What rude children you are. I should punish you for such insolence.
The boys begged the creature, saying they had nothing to give, but the creature only scoffed.
You should have thought of that before entering my woods.
The two boys begged him for mercy, to take pity on 2 starving children.
Mercy is not a trait I ever saw a need to learn. Those who enter my realm bring me gifts. You will present me with a gift, or you will suffer my wrath.
He spoke with a sense of refinement that was at odds with his monstrous nature. The boys had still not summoned up the courage to look at him, and now they shuddered against each other as they thought of what to do. The oldest looked at his still warm can of beans in his hand and saw that he had 2, possibly 3 bites of beans left. He held them out to the creature, still not looking at him, and hoped it would be enough. The creature approached, sniffing at the can, and a weight slid into the warm vessel. It slurped as its long tongue lapped at the beans, smacking as it tasted the juice and liking what it found.
Lovely.
The creature purred, turning its head towards the younger, who had begun to shake.
And you? Share with me what is in your cup, little one, and you might be allowed to live through the night.
The youngest had his hand over the mouth of his cup, unwilling to move it. His brother told him to give the creature a taste. Then they could leave this place and never come back. The youngest boy shook his head again. The creature put his face very close to the boy and demanded that he remove his hand in a low growl. The boy's shaking hand slid from the cup opening, and the brother felt his stomach drop. The younger boy had wolfed his beans, eating them all, and had nothing to show but a cup of juice residue. The older boy could see his tears cutting lines down his dirty face, leaving trails of pink against his skin. He started apologizing, hastily and low, to the older boy, saying he just couldn't help himself. As the creature asked for his due, the younger could only hold out his shaking, empty cup for the beast to inspect. The tongue slid into the metal, making a soupy, gloopy noise as the creature searched for food. And as it slid out, the two heard the creature tutting in disappointment.
What a shame.
Suddenly, the warmth of the brother's forehead was gone, and the forest was filled with the sounds of his younger brother screaming. The older brother curled into a ball, shuddering and weeping as he heard his brother torn to pieces. He closed his eyes and begged God to make it over, but it was some time before the forest was quiet again. He lay there listening to the wind howl, his campfire guttering out as he shivered in the dark, alone. The three of us sat speechless, looking at John as the campfire crackled before him. Out in the woods, an animal loosed a long, mournful howl, and Conley suddenly decided to sleep under the nearby overpass. "It's chilly, but at least I won't get ate up by no beast." Travis agreed, and the two grabbed their stuff and moved on. "Better go join them," John said, poking at the fire as he looked into the flames. "Sounds like an old friend is looking for his due." I heard something in his words I didn't like, something akin to a suicidal friend telling you it's fine to leave them alone, but I got up and followed the others anyway. The last time I saw John, he was still staring into the flames. We looked for him the next day, but he was nowhere to be found. We found the old campsite. We found his pack, but of John, there was no sign. By midday, we just assumed he had left, and we moved on. I'm still not entirely sure what happened to him, but if you meet John on the road somewhere, tell him his troop misses him. And if you meet the creature from his story, I hope you saved it some beans. Otherwise, you might discover what really happened to John on that windy December night by the interstate.
Listening to the fire crackle always makes me think about camping. I think fall camping is my favorite. Just being out there as the seasons change, listening to the wildlife as it goes about its scribble-scrabble, trying to find a little bit of food for the winter before it comes down on them like an icy promise. Maybe it's not too early in the season for a little bit of camping, but God, here in Florida, it's always so hot. Moving on from fall camping to winter camping, or winter homelessness, I should say, let's hear a little story about a strange offer made by a man the storyteller doesn't know. Let's learn a little more about the beggar's deal.
"Penny for your thoughts, young man?" I glanced down at the old man as he sat in the snow, his jeans getting crusty from the ice. He held a grubby coin in his threadbare glove, and his eyes looked up imploring me to take it. Homeless people weren't exactly rare in the city, and I was honestly tired of being asked for change today. I had been asked for change as I went to work that morning, several times. I'd been asked when I stepped out to have a smoke around 10 that morning. I'd been asked again as I went to lunch, and twice more as I returned. I'd been asked for handouts throughout the day, but this was the first one who had offered to give me anything in return. I reached down hesitantly, and when he moved it out of the way, I figured he would make his pitch now. The coin was rare, the coin would be special, he would want something for it, and I would be asked to give. Your thoughts first, son. An even trade, I'm sure. I drew in a noseful of cold air, thinking about making something up, before finally settling on the truth. Okay, you know what I'm thinking about? I'll tell you. I pass people like you every day, people on the street with nothing better to do than beg. Why not try to better yourself with all this time you have? Why not drag yourself out of your situation rather than sit and huddle in it? You have the ability to get out of your current quagmire. You choose not to, and that makes me angry. I'd expected the old man to get mad. I expected him to get quiet and take his coin back. But he surprised me when he laughed. Is that what you think? That we're all just lazy bums out on the road with nothing better to do? I imagine you might change your mind if you had to do it yourself. I scoffed. Please, living off the generosity of others? This is a city of thousands. Even if only 1% showed you charity, that's still likely more than I make in a week. The old man smiled knowingly, and that should have been my first indication that something was amiss. Even then, I sensed that something didn't feel right here. This wasn't the usual kind of banter one had with a person, even someone like this guy. It was starting to prickle the hair on the back of my neck. Why'd I stop to talk with this fella at all? The whole thing just felt odd. Want to make a wager on it? The old beggar asked. He still had the coin out, and when I got a good look at it, I could tell it wasn't what I had thought it was. It was filthy, but it had the underlying gleam of gold. It was unevenly milled and thick on the edge, he showed me. Live for a week as I do, if you can. After 7 days, if you're still alive, I'll grant you any wish your heart desires. I shook my head, thinking the old man had to be crazy. What was he, some kind of genie? My mind flashed to the Beauty and the Beast story, too, however. Hadn't the fairy come to him on a snowy night and made requests? If I declined his offer, what would the consequences be? I shook my head. I was a grown man out here weighing fairy tales. What was wrong with me? Sure, old-timer, it's a deal. What do I need to do? Prick my finger? Promise you my firstborn? Just take the coin, he said, holding it out. But make sure you hang on to it. If you go the full week and lose the coin, well, I can't promise it'll end well for you. I rolled my eyes, reaching for it without thinking. I wasn't really afraid that it might be magic, more concerned that it might be coated in fentanyl or acid or something. I had gloves on, though, and I didn't expect that whatever he had coated it in would get through my leather wraps. I lifted the coin to my eye, looking at it in the dim light of the lamppost, and saw that it was bigger than I had thought it would be. It was the size of a $50, one side picturing a proud king, while the other side a grinning skeleton. The words "Percussum est Della" were printed on the front with "Vivero ve dal mare ab io" emblazoned on the back. I knew that was Latin, but that was all I knew. The coin was old, some ancient edifice of commerce, and as I looked at it in the street lamp, it flashed in my eye with a stabbing pain. The last thing I heard was the old man laughing, and then I fell into darkness for some undetermined amount of time. I was awoken not by my alarm,
but by the less than kind tap of a stick on my foot. Hey, I've already told you can't sleep here. Pack it up before I call the cops. I came groggily awake, aware of being cold and slightly damp before anything else. I put a hand up to my eyes, wondering what had been on that coin the old man had given me. And as my vision came into view, I saw a large man in an apron standing over me with a broom. He held it with the blunt end raised, preparing to swing it if I made any sudden moves. I put a hand up and told him that there was some kind of mistake, but when I raised my hand, I saw it was wrapped in threadbare gloves, the same ones that had been holding the coin last night. What's more, my clothes felt scratchy, like bugs had been crawling on me, and as I got up, the man with the broom tensed like he meant to take a swing. I'm serious. Get the hell out of here before I call the cops. I told him I was going, and as I stumbled out of the alley, I saw that it was early morning. There was still ice on the ground, steam coming up through the sewer vents, and people were milling up the sidewalk on their way to work or wherever. I must have looked a mess because they walked past me without a second glance. The man with the broom was watching me from the mouth of the alley that I'd been sleeping in, and made it pretty clear that if I didn't start moving, he was going to make good on his threat to call the police. As I made my way down the street, I was already reaching for my cell phone. I'd call an Uber and get back to my apartment. I was unsurprised to find it was missing, as was my wallet and my house keys. No problem. They had no idea which apartment I lived in, so the key wouldn't do them any good. A car was something I never saw the need to own, so I had no vehicle for them to steal. The old man had gotten away with about $80 from my wallet at the end of the day, and anything he took from my bank account would be returned. I'd go to my apartment and tell them I'd been mugged, and they would help me get into my place. I hoped the old man had a good laugh after drugging and stripping me, leaving me in an alley as he dressed me like a vag and took my stuff. Live a week like us, indeed. I'd be back in my apartment in a matter of minutes. Then the police could show him what it was like to live as an inmate. I was full of indignant rage as I passed in front of the big shop window not far from my house, and that's when I caught sight of myself in the reflection. At first, I thought the old man was taunting me, following me to see what I would do once I woke up. But when I rounded on him to give him a piece of my mind, I realized I was looking at my own reflection. I was the old man, his leathery skin and short gray hair, and I just stood there, touching my face with my hand as I tried to make sense of it. Live as we live for a week, if you can. I suddenly understood that there would be no going back to my apartment. There would be no talking to my bank or getting my phone replaced. I felt something heavy against my left butt cheek, and I reached into the back of my threadbare jeans to find the coin nestled there. I looked at both sides, the Emperor and the skull, and suddenly discovered that I could read the words there. "Thus the deal is struck," read the Emperor. "Live or be damned by it," said the skull. I wanted to fling it into the street, but I remembered what he had said and slipped it back into my pocket. I had noticed something else that both sides had shared. The minting date was a week from now, and that mirrored what the old man had said too. Live for a week as I live, if you can. I nodded. How hard could it be? That first day was probably my high point. I was full of resolve as I walked around the city. I didn't have any luck with breakfast, but that was okay. I didn't see any need to beg. I'd find money if I needed it. Besides, begging would only prove that he was right. I was going to do something with my week, start a new job, or find an honest way to make money. So, I set out to find work. One look at myself was enough to tell me that I'd be turned away from most upscale jobs. I needed a shave and a haircut badly. My clothes were old and stained, and I needed a bath worse than I needed a meal. All these things were outside my grasp without money, but I knew where I might get some of them. I'd heard of the mission shelters. Everyone had heard of them, seen them on the billboards, or heard their commercials.
I knew they had clothes I could use and maybe facilities I could use to take a shower. If I could get myself back to rights, then I could secure employment and not have to beg. I would likely have to spend a night or two in the mission, but I would have a job and money, and I could get back on my feet before the week was out. I came to the mission around 9 and was met at the door by a man with a clipboard. "Good morning. Are you checking in?" "I was hoping to get some clothes for an interview, maybe a shower and some..." "Terrific," the man said, cutting me off. "Are you part of our employment program? You don't look familiar." "Well, no, but I want to use the clothes to gain employment so I can..." "Unfortunately, sir, those clothes are only for people in our employment program, and there is a sizable waiting list for that program. I can get you on that waiting list, but it's likely to be some time before we can..." Started getting a little indignant. "I mean, the clothes are donated. As a taxpayer, those are my taxes at work. I'll bring them back. I just need to look good for an interview." The man's well-crafted smile was beginning to slip. "Do you have an interview lined up then?" I realized my mistake and admitted that I didn't. "Well then, you have no reason to need those clothes. Now, if you'd like to get on our program list, we can do that, but again, that takes time." I was a little put out, the process seeming a little daunting, and I told him I'd like a meal and a shower, if I could. "And I want you to have those things too, but if this is your first time here, then we need you to fill out some paperwork so we can get you on our system. If you'll step right over here, we can..." "Do I need to register for a bowl of soup and a hot shower?" I didn't mean to become belligerent, but I was a little put out by the rigmarole. "Sir, have you been drinking? I believe I detect alcohol on your breath, and you're becoming quite upset. We can't allow you in if you're inebriated, and you have to be 24 hours sober before you can enter the mission. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave." I said some things then, things I regret now, and I didn't even see the young bruiser who stepped between us as I got in the clipboard man's face. When he tossed me onto the sidewalk, the man with the clipboard saying I wasn't welcome at the mission again, I got creakily to my feet and checked to see if I was all there. Other than some bruises, I was none the worse for wear. I was still hopeful that I could make my way without them, so I set off to find employment. By the end of the first day, I was shivering on a bench in the park that I'd never seen before. The park was less for joggers and bird watchers, and more for drunks and needlers. A pair of them were sharing syringes near an old oak tree not too far away as I tried to get warm under some newspapers I had scavenged. I tried to ignore my empty belly, too, as I lay with the cold wood beneath me. I hadn't eaten much today, just a part of a sandwich I'd found in a garbage can, and I was feeling empty as I tried to sleep. I told myself that tomorrow would be better, and I fell asleep, praying that it would be so. Just 6 more days to go. The next day I woke up ravenous, my head spinning and my mouth dry. It was early, first light, and I knew that if I wanted to eat today, I needed to get some money. As luck would have it, I found something not far from the park. There was a warehouse nearby, and I heard men unloading a truck as they prepared to load up another. I offered to help. Most of the workers looked like scabs anyway, and the guy with the magazine and the cigar told me that he'd beat whatever I broke out of me and to get to work. I spent a few hours moving boxes from one truck to another, and when the guy came out and told us we were done, he put a $10 bill in my hand and told me thanks. "Come back tomorrow if you want another one," he said. I wanted to be happy as I looked at the crumpled bill, but I realized this wouldn't take me very far if I wasn't careful. I tried to make it last, buying a coffee from a gas station, along with a simple breakfast, but by noon, the 10 was spent. I'd been walking the streets, trying to luck into some grunt work. I found another warehouse offering under-the-table jobs, but as the sun went down and we all came to the office to get paid, it seemed that the boss had left, and we were left with no options but to disperse or answer to the police. I went back to the same park again that night, but the cold after the sun went down was too much to bear in the open. I walked around trying to find somewhere to sleep out of the elements, and at around 2, I found a doorway that lacked the little rubber spikes they usually put out to dissuade homeless from sleeping there. As I shivered in the doorway, I told myself it would only be another 5 days. As I slipped into sleep, I hoped I'd be alive to see the end of those 5 days. The next day, day 3, I finally gave in and began begging. The job I'd found the day before wasn't open, the gates barred, and the snow deep enough to keep the trucks off the road. I was hungry, I was cold, and I didn't dare go back to the mission. So I found the warmest spot I could find and began panhandling. The crowd that morning was small, the snow closing a lot of the businesses, and they weren't overly generous. By the time noon rolled around, I had a few dollars and some change in the can that I'd managed to scoop out of a dumpster. It got me some junk that wasn't very filling, and I walked around looking for work as the snow began to melt. I was a little more wary about taking odd jobs, lest I get taken like the day before. And as the night began to settle and the people made their way home, I once again set up to beg. I was dozing against a wall, feeling weak and tired from the cold, when someone cleared their throat loudly. I opened my eyes to find 2 cops standing over me, looking cold and grumpy. "Move along, sir. You know you can't do that here." He poked my can with his foot, sending it tipping over as the small amount of change rattled out. "I'm not hurting anybody. I'm just hungry." "Doesn't matter. Hungry or not, you can't do that here. Get moving before we move you." I wanted to get indignant, but I simply didn't have the energy. I scooped up the coins and started trudging through the snow again. I didn't know where I was going, but I remembered the old man's words and knew I would lose what precious coins I had if I got arrested. I wasn't even halfway through the week, and I already felt like I might not make it to reap my reward. The next few days were a blur. I remember trying to donate plasma and being turned away for various reasons. I looked for work, but the snow had ground a lot of businesses to a halt. I found warm places that would feed me, churches and soup kitchens, but they weren't equipped to let people stay. I ended up sleeping rough both nights, shivering on stoops or under the slight cover of alleys, my blanket getting soaked in the snow as it melted beneath me. It was the most miserable I'd ever been, and it made me wonder where I'd ever gotten the idea that the homeless of the city were lazy. Looking back on my words to the vagrant, words spoken out of ignorance, I felt a deep sense of shame as I remembered how I had talked to him. He was just trying to get a meal, just trying to survive or find somewhere that wasn't a chilly bench to sleep for the night. And all I had seen was a leech trying to get fat off the hard work of others. As I lay beside a dumpster Friday night, watching people drink in the warm light of a familiar bar, I knew I'd never make that mistake again. Saturday dawned cold and dark, the snow melt making the ice thick on the sidewalks as the world came awake again. I had some luck after helping the owner of the store I was sleeping beside clear the ice from the front of the stoop. He patted my shoulder, giving me a plastic bag of sandwiches he was about to throw away. I marveled at them, counting about 12 of the plastic-wrapped squares, and he even threw in a cup of coffee to go along with it. I tried to tell him it was too much, but he waved his hands and laughed. "You're doing me a favor, really. Those sandwiches were going to go in the garbage before I almost busted my ass on that slick sidewalk. If you can get some use out of them, more power to you. Take them with my thanks." By 10, I had eaten about 5 of them, the coffee long gone, and I felt full for the first time in quite a while. It was something I had taken for granted, that feeling of being nearly too full. But as I sat in the park, my blanket keeping the worst of the snow from soaking into me, it felt good to be here again. I had refilled the coffee cup from a nearby fountain, and as I drank water and soaked up the sunshine, I felt pretty good about the direction I was going. "Hey, friend," came a familiar voice, and my eyes snapped open as I started to bolt. It was a man in similar dress, his face scraggly from many days of beard growth, and he was smiling through his remaining teeth at me. I could smell him between the 10 feet that separated us, but it wasn't an altogether unpleasant smell. He simply smelled earthy as opposed to bad, stale in a way that made me think he was taking care of his clothes when he could, and the jacket he wore bulged humorously,
making me think he wore at least 2. "Whoa there, didn't mean to scare you. I was just wondering if I could trade you for one of them sandwiches. I've got some of them vitamin C packs from the free clinic. You can mix them with your water and get something nice to drink to go along with your full belly." He was holding out a crumpled silver packet with the words "Emergency" on the front, and I nodded as I held out a ham and cheese for him. He smiled again, asking if he could sit as he tore into the sandwich with gusto. He had clearly not been eating well, and I realized that must have been the way I had torn into the first one that I'd eaten earlier. "Name's Carter. Good to meet you, friend. Haven't seen you around. Are you new in town?" I told him I was, since it wasn't technically a lie. He laughed and told me I'd picked a heck of a time to come to town. It was the worst snowstorm they had seen in a long time, and the homeless guys were having a hell of a time keeping warm. Between the mission and their paperwork, and the cops and their endless rage for guys just trying to get by, and the shopkeepers not wanting us in their alleys or stoops, it's getting hard to find a place to lay your head most nights. A few others had wandered over to see who Carter was talking to, and they traded some food for the sandwiches as well. I ended up giving away a few of them, and as the afternoon stretched on, they all decided to migrate somewhere to find warmth for the night. I told them good night, meaning to find my own place to sleep, but Carter called my name before they left the park and asked if I was coming. "There's always room for one more around the fire," he said. I spent that night sitting in an alley that was in the middle of a 4-way intersection of buildings. It cut the wind nicely, and someone had secured a tarp to keep the snow off of us. The barrels here had coals burning in them, and the people who stayed here had created a kind of oasis in the swirling snow. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing," Carter said. I spent the evening in the company of other cast-offs, laughing and sharing food around as we warmed ourselves by the fires that glowed throughout the night. Someone had a guitar, other people told stories. I fell asleep against a wall in the best shape I'd been in for the last 5 days. I wished I had known these people from the start, and wished I had found a place from the very first day. But I was introspective enough to know that I would have insulted them at the start of this strange journey. This was a place I had come to naturally, a state of mind I had reached on my own, and as I slipped into a blissful slumber, I hoped it wouldn't simply disappear when I woke up, like some kind of dream. I wish it had now. The alternative was a lot worse. I woke up to the sounds of people yelling and running. One of the barrels had been turned over, the coals making smoke as they tried to catch a sleeping bag on fire. People were screaming, scooping up what they could as people moved in the dancing shadows with purpose. I shivered beneath my blanket, certain we were being attacked by demons, but as the shapes got closer, I saw they were police officers. They had discovered our camp, and now they were taking away our one refuge from the cold. I sat as still as I could, trying to be unseen, and when they moved away, I made a break for the nearest alley. I saw flashing lights and heard someone yell at me, but I just kept kicking up snow as I ran for my life. The sun was turning the horizon a hopeful pink, but I just kept moving. When people got in my way, I went around them. When bus stops or stoops rose up to block me, I moved around them too. I didn't dare stop until the sun beat down on my neck, and only then it was because I just couldn't go anymore. My legs were tired, my head spinning from overexertion, and when I flopped down onto the bench in a bus shell, I was out of breath. I kept trying to make sense of what had happened, but it just wouldn't mesh in my brain. Why had they come after us? We weren't hurting anyone. We were just looking for a warm place to gather. They had come in like we were terrorists, and I hoped that Carter and some of the others that I had met had made it away. I didn't know how long I sat there, but as my stomach started to growl, I knew I would need food. I thought I might put out my hat and try to get some money. The longer I sat there with my eyes closed, the more I wondered what the point was. The oasis now felt like a dirty trick. They'd allowed me a moment of happiness so they could pull the rug out from under me, just as I thought I might have found something better. I almost preferred the uncertainty of not knowing what to expect. As the day passed, I continued to sit on the cold metal bench. What was the point after all? If everything could change in a second, if all safety was an illusion, then why do anything? Enjoying your new life of leisure? I jumped, realizing someone had sat down next to me. I opened my eyes and realized it was me. I looked exactly the same as I always did in the mirror, but I realized that it had to be the old man, pretending to be me. As I sat here, day had become night, and just like that, we had passed 7 days. I'd done it, had weathered the storm, and I like to hope I was a better person for it. Just basking in my newfound sense of understanding, I answered, realizing it was true. I took the grubby coin out of my pocket and held it in my hand, finding a strange warmth coming from it as we sat in the chill. Well, you made it, and a deal is a deal. What will you wish for, now that you have all this knowledge? I put the coin in his hand, feeling the warmth transfer between us. I want the means to make sure no one else has to live like this. I want to help people, even if it's just in this town. Is that too vague? He closed his hand around the coin, and I felt that warmth radiate through my stomach. I can work with that. I closed my eyes, and suddenly, I was me again. I was sitting there as if waiting for a bus, and when I got up, I knew what I had to do. It was hard starting out, but the backers came, and as the money came, I slowly fed them. Slowly, I brought them off the street and gave them a place to stay. A decade ago, I took a coin from a beggar. Today, I own one of the largest shelters in the city. There are no confusing forms, no prerequisites, no red tape. We feed those who are hungry. We house those in need. And when I see the hope in their eyes, I know my wish has come true. I don't know if I could do it myself. What do you guys think? Do you think you could live as a homeless person for a while? Scrounging and getting dirty looks and really just receiving no help. Maybe think about those a little less fortunate next time you see them sitting around. For God's sakes, don't give them everything you have, but, what you can spare, I'm sure, is always welcome. Let's move on to another inevitability of homelessness, spending some time at the homeless shelter. So, let's hear a story about a particular night at the shelter.
I've worked at the homeless shelter in my town for about 7 years. In 7 years, I've done just about everything there. Cooked the food, cleaned the toilets, set up and run the AA meetings, done the little security work. Hell, I've been a glorified babysitter more nights than I can count. In all that time, though, I've come to care for the people who wander in, looking for a dry place to sleep and a warm bed for the night. I know everyone who works night shifts says this, but the night shifts at the shelter really are different from day shift. The day shift has no less than 6 staff in the kitchen. That's helpers and a chef, though he's less of a 5-star chef and more of a Waffle House fry cook. They've got 5 therapists and a doctor, as well as 3 nurses in the medical facility, and 6 staff members who do everything from answer the phones to clean the toilets. During the day, this place is more like a Howard Johnson than a shelter, but at night, it's more like a youth hostel. The night shift has 5 employees, a cook and a kitchen helper, both of whom are gone by 10, a nurse, who mostly tries to keep everything stable until morning, and 2 staffers who keep the place from falling apart. I am one of the latter. It's a strange way to do things, I know, but management figures that at night the residents should be sleeping and thus need less care. In all the time I've been here, I've broken up many, many fights, held a lot of hands while people were puking their guts out, waited on ambulances while someone had a seizure or went into convulsions, and herded scared residents into the hallway while someone went through a violent DT spell or ripped the dorm apart. I've also seen a small group of residents put on a production of A Christmas Story, seen them exchange gifts under a tree on Christmas Day, throw a regular resident a surprise birthday party, and help each other through loss and pain. The homeless community is a lot more tight-knit than anyone would ever believe, and despite its many problems, I've never had an incident like I did the night in question. That was the night that all hell broke loose. It happened about 3 weeks ago, December 18th, and I had just walked in out of a nasty blizzard. The weather is never what you'd call good, but today's weather was a killer. I crunched in a little before 6 and said hi to Janice, who was at the front desk that night. She looked up from her Candy Crush long enough to give me a half-hearted wave, which I returned before heading to the cafeteria. Dinner service was just starting, so I put on an apron and helped out. Chad, the shelter cook, doesn't like non-kitchen staff in the kitchen area, so I bypassed the back and took a spot on the line, where I passed out bowls of soup and grilled cheese sandwiches. I greeted some familiar faces, talked to some people I knew for a few minutes, and scanned the room for my regulars. There are many faces you know in a shelter, and those were the faces that I was looking for. I saw Lou and Chuck sitting around a table that was packed with other drifters. Chuck was telling a long and excited story to a crowd of homeless and stopped long enough to wave at me when he saw I was looking at him. Lou waved too, smiling, and Chuck went back to telling his story. While Lou was a classic example of a city vagrant, Chuck was what you'd call a traveler. He'd been here a few months, said he liked the architecture of our town, but before that, he claimed he'd been most everywhere. I've picked oranges in Florida for 50 cents a crate. I've brought in Idaho spuds for $2 a bag. I've worked in greasy spoon diners and driven cabs in New York City. And I'm here to tell you, girl, that I've seen just about everything this great nation has to offer. Probably saved a bundle, seeing as I saw it on my own 2 pins, too, he said as he slapped his leg and chuckled. He and Lou had palled around for a while, and I like to see someone looking out for Lou. As a recovering heroin addict, he doesn't always remember things so well, and if someone like Chuck or Lenny were looking out for him, he'd be less likely to stumble into traffic or hunt for a needle again. As though summoned by the thought of his name, Lenny came stomping up right about then and gave me his trademark Lenny smile, which showcased all 5 of his teeth. "Evening, Miss Liz. How's your night going so far?" I didn't immediately respond, though. Someone in the back had caught my eye. He looked like a mall Santa who had come wandering in for a bite before his shift, and it was certainly the right time of year for him. He wore a dark red cap, had a long white beard that hung to his waist, and was dressed in an old red ski jacket, topped off with a pair of scuffed black motorcycle boots. He sat in the back and ate his meal, and I could see the end of a gnarled wooden stick leaning against the wall within easy reach. He had a big old stained traveling sack perched on it, and it only enhanced the idea that he was some kind of Santa Claus. Lenny looked back to where I was looking for a minute before trying to bring me back to reality. "You know that old man, Miss Liz?" he asked, genuinely curious. I shook my head. "No, Lenny, I don't think I've ever seen him before. Have you?" Lenny shook his head in a slow, deliberate way. "No, ma'am. I guess he must be from out of town, like Chuck," he said as he pointed to old Chuck, who was miming a fishing net that was full, it seemed, as he yanked it out of somewhere. I gave Lenny his food and made small talk. He responded with his usual sermon. He had woken up, got dressed, and he and Lou had gone down to Panhandle on their favorite corner. They had left before noon, since that's when the cops usually came around. They'd eaten their lunch at the shelter, then spent the afternoon looking for cans and bottles to recycle. Each of these pronouncements contained a "by Jesus" or "by the grace of God, amen," and Lenny was a firm believer in the power of God, and believed that his mercy was the reason he was still alive today. A staunch atheist I may be, but I wasn't about to dampen his spirits. I gave him an extra grilled cheese, and he went over to sit with his friends. After dinner service, most of the residents went to the activity room to watch TV, or hung out in the dining hall to talk. I took this opportunity to visit one of my friends in the medical bay, before it was time to call lights out. The medical door sits right across from the welcome desk, where Janice was still on her phone as she had been earlier. I ducked in and received a nod from Miss Casterly, our resident night nurse, and I said hello to some of my other residents that were in here. Miss Casterly and I have a lot in common, at least in my mind. She's a retired school nurse with 5 years of nursing school before discovering her passion for teaching. Her job is to put Band-Aids on it and keep it from getting out of control until the doctor gets here in the morning. In many ways, I have much the same responsibility. I've always seen us as soldiers in the same war, and I think she senses that when we talk. John was in the back. His legs were still wrapped up, and he was covered in quite a few blankets, as the IV dripped him full of warmth. John was one of the residents I had hoped to get off the streets, and before his accident, I thought I had succeeded. He'd been an engineer before his wife left him, and his depression had caused him to slip into a dangerous spiral that had ultimately landed him on the streets. When I found out about his background, I had started trying to help him find a job so he could get back on his feet. When a local factory needed a machinist, John had agreed to give it a try. Then, 2 weeks ago, he'd gone and dropped off the face of the earth. I'd almost given up on finding him again when the hospital called me a few days ago. He'd given them my name just before they were going to kick him out, and I helped him get back to the shelter so he could recover. It turned out he and 5 other homeless guys had been caught out in the blizzard and nearly froze to death under the East Side overpass. His legs had been frostbitten pretty good, but thanks to the hospital, he was recovering nicely, and thanks to the shelter, he'd be able to finish recovering without being turned back out into the blistering cold. He greeted me, and we talked for a few minutes about nothing in particular. I asked him about his recovery, and he said he thought he'd be better in a few days. He asked me if I'd heard from the factory about the job, and I told him they had been understanding once I explained his situation. They had asked me to get in touch with him after John was feeling better, and I told them we certainly would. John thanked me for working so hard for him, and after a little more small talk, I excused myself to go check on the dorms. Had I stayed any longer, I likely wouldn't be alive to tell this story. I had left medical and was going into the dorm area when I heard the front doors open. I felt a blast of cold air run across my back, and I turned to see who'd come in out of the chill. I felt myself stiffen, however, as I saw them. 3 men in overcoats with huge scarves covering their mouths. I couldn't have told you why at the time, but they just struck me as wrong. Their posture made me think of something not quite human, that crouched way of standing that you sometimes see in primates. The way they held their heads made me think their faces were oddly elongated, too. They hadn't seen me yet, and their attention was focused on Janice as she rose to greet them. She got up and walked towards them, asking them to sign in and brandishing a clipboard at them. That was when one of them reached out and broke her neck. Now, I don't mean that they used ESP or telekinesis or anything. When I say they reached out and broke her neck, what I mean is that his hand moved so fast that I couldn't even see it. Janice fell with her head twisted all the way around, and I was left gazing in a stupor. She hadn't moved. He hadn't moved, except for his hand, and she suddenly went from being alive to being dead in the space of 2 seconds. As her body crumpled to the floor, her killer made a muffled sound like a cat yowling and ripped the scarf off his face. Underneath, its face was the no color of static, and its skin seemed to crawl like an army of dead white ants. His face opened and his mouth elongated like a snake dislocating its jaw as it fell on her and started tearing her clothes off. It ripped them open, like you or I might tear the wrapper off a candy bar, and it bent its face down as it bit into her. It pulled and tore chunks of meat away with hungry, feral bites, and it didn't chew the meat so much as the meat dissolved when it came in contact with his skin. I know that's a lot to process, and I know it sounds like it might take a while, but this whole exchange happened in less than a minute from beginning to end. 1 minute, Janice was getting up to ask the strangers to sign in, and a minute later, she was being chewed on like an animal in a National Geographic film, while I stood there, frozen to the spot. I know that makes me sound like a coward, but I couldn't help it. The scene before me was so alien, so shocking that my mind almost couldn't process it. As the killer hunched, eating, its friends turned and headed into the medical area. Miss Chasterley said something as they came in, but it was drowned out as the whole room erupted into shouts of terror mixed with breaking furniture and alien yowls. Then the thing looked up, noticing me for the first time, and the sight of this strange face and its sewing needle teeth moved me to action. I turned and ran through the double doors that led to the dorm and slammed them shut behind me. I slammed my fist onto the big red button on the wall and sighed as the maglocks engaged behind me. The state required us to install them on the doors to the medical and the dormitory area, which led to the back office. Since both areas contained confidential files, we had to have a way to secure them, and what better way than magnetic locks that exert 1,000 pounds of pressure? I put my back against the door, knowing that these things couldn't get in through that, and we'd be safe until they left or the police arrived. Knowing this, I still screeched when it hit the door hard enough to rattle it in the frame. The residents started coming out then, and the corridor was soon filled with the sounds of running feet and raised voices. Before I knew it, I had 20 or so upset people behind me. When Lenny put a hand on my shoulder, I jumped to the ceiling. His face was ashen, and I could tell that he'd caught a glimpse of the hallway behind me. He opened his mouth, probably to ask what was going on, when an inhuman scream pierced the hallway and something hit the glass on the door hard enough to send cracks running through it. That worried me more than a little, because that glass is supposed to stop a bullet. The first bullet, at least. This thing had just cracked it with a single hit. The second hit bulged it grotesquely inward, and the third turned it into a square of broken glass and twisted metal rebar. An arm stretched through and began hunting for a latch then. "Lisa, get back!" someone yelled, and I saw Chuck run forward with a fire extinguisher in hand. He slammed the butt of the canister into the arm, but it did no more damage than the shards of glass had. The arm continued to rake around, searching for some way inside, and when Chuck brought the canister down for the third time, it finally seemed to register. It swiped out with those long nails, and the canister parted easily, spraying clouds of foam into the air. Chuck let it go and threw the sputtering thing at the arm, backtracking as he moved towards the group. He turned to me then, and I suddenly realized they were all looking at me, looking for me to guide them out of this situation. I almost laughed at them. What part of this did they think was in the Homeless Shelter Management Handbook? There was no protocol for being set upon by a group of monsters who ignored the laws of nature and did whatever they wanted. They wanted me to help them, but I doubted that anyone could help them. We weren't people to these things. We were just troublesome food bits stuck at the bottom of a can. We were trapped in here, and it was only a matter of time before they knocked down the door, maglocks or not, and turned this hallway into a slaughterhouse. I fell to my knees, wanting to bring them up to my chest, and my body longed to drop to the floor so I could spend my last few minutes hugging myself in terror before the end. I had started to do just that when the sound of a walking stick brought me back to reality. The man who looked like Santa Claus came out of the dormitory and smiled at me in a decidedly up-the-chimney-he-goes kind of way. He said not a word, but went straight to his work, and as the creature's hand scampered about like a long-nailed spider, he drew close and stopped just out of arm's reach. The owner of the hand stopped reaching, and I heard a wet noise that sounded like the worst head cold in history. The thing sniffed at the air like a man sucking up soup, and it said something that I'll never forget. I had to look it up afterwards when I was in my right mind again, but it uttered a single muddy word before trying to pull its hand away. It said Sacerdos and tried desperately to get its hand out of the hole. The old man shot his hand out, quick as a snake, and gripped the wrist in a single gnarled old hand. The creature squealed, the scream too high to be called a scream, really, and the corridor was filled with a pulse of white light. Then it dimmed, and I saw the arm no longer attached to the creature. It disintegrated before our eyes into something like oatmeal and sawdust. The creature went crazy then. Its screams were full of terrible fury as it slammed its misshapen face into the little window and gnashed its two big teeth at the little man. He snapped a finger out then and booped the grotesque thing on its flat nose. In another bright flash, the creature was gone, little more than a greasy cloud in the space of the little window. Through the hole in the door, I could see the other two lumbering out into the hallway, streaked with gore and not even trying to hide their strangeness. I looked over at the little man standing placidly by the door. Some black substance had splashed onto his coat, but he didn't seem to notice. I started getting nervous around him the longer he stood there. The hellish creatures were trapped outside the room, but how dangerous was this seemingly harmless old man who'd reduced one of them to nothing but nothing with a flash of light? When you work with the homeless for long enough, you start to question things like miracles or even the concept of change itself. This old man had just done something that I couldn't explain, and he felt like a piece in a game I didn't understand. A piece that was counter to the things outside, I hoped. "Miss, I want you to release the door and let me out into the hallway," he finally said. I gaped at him. "Sir, those things will kill you. I've already watched them kill at least one person tonight, and I'm not in a big hurry to watch them tear you apart, too." He smiled at me in that Santa Claus way of his. "Oh, I don't think so." I had wondered what brought me here tonight. It appears that the powers that be knew that this was where I needed to be the most. I started to argue with him, but something in his eyes told me that he was going out there, whether I wanted him to or not. I pushed the button, and the door opened. He walked out and said the last thing I ever heard him say. "You won't want to watch this." He strode towards the pair of them as I re-engaged the lock. Suddenly, my eyes were assaulted by a bright flash of light like nothing I had ever seen. I fell behind the door, shutting my stinging eyes, and I could hear other residents yelling in similar pain. The creatures screamed in agony, and under that din, I could hear a sound like sizzling bacon as the old man went about his butcher's work. The whole thing lasted less than a minute, but it was a whole 10 minutes before I could see through my watering eyes. Standing shakily, I looked through the window hole and saw that nothing but the empty hallway remained. No blood, no bodies except for Janice's, and no evidence that any of them had been there at all. I called the police and Mrs. Stone, who's responsible for the interests of the benefactors. The police arrived first. The ambulance they brought with them was a welcome sight. Janice was pronounced dead at the scene, along with 10 others in the medical bay, Miss Chasterley among them. The medics said that it looked like a wild animal had attacked them, and big pieces of flesh had been torn out of them, along with some of their softer parts. The worst was their eyes, which had simply been devoured by whatever had attacked them, and no one was left alive to tell the police anything. The residents and I told them about the 3 men, omitting the old man, but the officers didn't seem to believe that a monster had attacked us. They said it was likely a group of mentally unstable residents with masks that had maybe had a personal grudge against the shelter, and that out of shock we had concocted the rest. Miss Stone arrived then, and I had to tell the story again, but I don't think she believed me either. I was given 2 weeks paid time off while the shelter was repaired, but I'll have to think long and hard about whether I want to return. The idea that this might happen again, has likely happened before, chills me to the bone and makes me question everything I've ever believed in. Who was that old man? Was he an angel? A messenger from God? A creature from space? And what does that make those things that attacked us? I've spent the last 3 nights trying to find forgetfulness in the bottom of a whiskey bottle. Every time I close my eyes, though, I can still see those things. I probably always will. I'm sharing this so maybe less equipped shelter workers will read it, and it might help them should this happen to them. They come at night, and they attack your wounded first. They kill without remorse. If I'd seen them on the street, I would have thought they were just normal people. But their coats hide monsters like nothing you'd ever expect. If it happens to you, then I wish you luck. If they find you, then I just hope the old man found you first.
I think if I was going to be homeless, I think I'd rather be more of a tramp, traveling from town to town, not really settling in any one place. Just on the move, seeing America on, what I could brusque or what I could pick up off the ground. There's, I don't know, there's just something appealing about that lifestyle. I don't know, it makes me think of being more of like a D&D adventurer than, a homeless guy. Speaking of tramps and vagabonds, let's move on to our next story. A story about a homeless man that finds himself with a little bit of money. A homeless guy who's looking for just an ounce of normality and finds a motel that's anything but. So, remember to check your sheets next time you stay anywhere. You don't want to feel the bedbugs bite.
It's the little things sometimes. A good meal, a familiar song on the radio, a soft bed to sleep in after sleeping on benches or in sleeping bags for the past few years. The last one had been tainted for me after that night. I didn't think of myself as homeless. I had a beautiful house in Tampa, Florida, where my wife and my kids lived. I had access to the bay, a 2-car garage, a big backyard for the kids to play in. It also had my wife's new husband, the guy she married after our divorce, so I'm not exactly welcome there. After the papers were finalized, I literally walked from the courthouse to a camping store, and after $400 charged to the credit card I shared with my ex-wife, I felt I had everything I needed to start a more carefree life. I thought I'd just live rough from now on, and to hell with everything else. I would ride the rails, take day labor, and just be an explorer in the modern age. That's what I thought of myself as, an explorer instead of just a vagrant. After doing that for about 5 years, I've learned a few things, and lost a lot of the crap I bought on that long ago day. I've learned which towns will ask you to leave and which towns will throw you in jail for public vagrancy. I've learned which day labor companies are willing to work with guys who sleep in alleys. I've learned the best way to get a shower and a shave in a public restroom without attracting attention. It's gyms. Gyms are the best for that. But above all else, I've learned that sometimes it's best to treat yourself when you can manage. That's what I was doing. I was trying to treat myself and get out of the heat for the night. I grew up in South Florida, so the heat is no stranger to me. I remember sleeping with the windows up, ceiling fan on, hoping for a breeze to rustle the curtains as I stuck to my sheets. The heat doesn't bother me like it does a lot of people, but this year had just been so hot. The heat was near constant, and I had rolled my sleeping bag up for the season and slept on a threadbare blanket on the ground most nights. I was in a rural area close to Alabama, one farm community with a short name and a small population. I spent my days unloading or moving freight at the train depot, and my nights trying to find a nice place to bed down. Sometimes I'd do day labor, sometimes I'd do odd jobs for people, but the police left me be for the most part, and I thanked them by not getting drunk and making an ass of myself. I was considering making this a regular thing, staying for a few months and renting a trailer at the Happy Acres Trailer Court, but then I got the word from Doris that they were downsizing a bit, and they couldn't really afford to keep paying me under the table. Doris was a sweet 55-year-old grandmother who was just trying to make it to retirement, and she told me that she was very sorry, but they were just going to have to let me go. I didn't really mind, I suppose. I took it as a sign that it was time to move on to somewhere else. Time to do some exploring farther north, maybe. It was getting close to harvest time, and there were plenty of little towns in Alabama or Georgia where a man could get farm labor work and bed in the barn or a bunkhouse. It was hard work, but it was good work. And I was hopeful as I took the small collection of cash that Doris had collected for me and set out on the road. That whole day, though, was the hottest day I had ever experienced. I hit the road about 8 a.m., and I was walking up the side of the highway by 9. It was the last week of July, and you could see the heat as it baked off the asphalt. The sun was high, and by 10 I was sweating as I prayed for a semi to come blowing past. It was little relief when one finally did, though. The air that buffeted into my face was like a giant exhaling on me. I thought longingly about the big fan running on the docks and how I could catch a long breeze between unloading and loading trains as I drove my forklift underneath it. By afternoon, I was miserable. My back felt like it weighed about 500 pounds, and the straps dug into my sore shoulders. I was in Alabama. I had stopped at the rest stop to use the bathroom at the border, but I was a good piece from Dothan, the closest big city. If I could get there, I could get some day labor, find a farmer looking for laborers for the season. I could even just pick up a job at a depot or as a fry cook or something, so I could afford to stay indoors until it was time to move on again. As I walked that first day, I even dared to dream that I might find something less temporary and make Dothan a long stop. I had grown up on a farm, picking vegetables and milking cows and taking care of horses, and the idea that I might get along with some farmer and become his stableman or his labor foreman was appealing. On the other hand, I was a lapsed accountant, too. I had worked for an office in Tampa and could easily get back with a place and make that my life again. I could get an apartment, have a stable job again, maybe even see my kids sometime if they wanted. Like I said, big cities are sometimes full of possibilities, and there's little else to do on the road but daydream. When night fell, I was squarely in the Badlands. For those of you unfamiliar with Highway 98, there's a stretch before you get to Dothan where there isn't much of anything but fireworks stands and little houses. There are occasional gas stations. Hell, there's even a really nice casino out there that no one ever goes to. But if you're on foot and seeing it through the headlights of passing cars, it can be a little spooky. The remains of abandoned houses that are slowly being reclaimed by the land look a lot like haunted houses when the lights of a passing semi suddenly bring them to life. The broken windows of a failing business seem to leer at passers-by as a minivan screams away from them. The heat was still baking up through the soles of my boots, too, and I was starting to wobble a little when I finally decided to stop for the night. It was 8, some pink still on the horizon, but the heat of the 12-hour walk had exhausted me. I had intended to move over into the nearby scrublands and try to find some respite from the hot evening, but when the lighted sign appeared at the bottom of the hill, I thought it might be Providence throwing me a bone. Eddie's Discount Motel rotated garishly on a sign out front, and I could see a little neon sign beneath it that read Vacancies. I had about $200 in the compartment in my backpack, and about $60 in my left sock. Depending on how much of a discount Eddie's rooms were at, I might find a nice bed for the evening. As I walked to the bottom of the hill, I started daydreaming again, thinking about the continental breakfast, a hot shower, maybe some HBO before settling into a real bed for the night. I could check out around 10 and be on the road again, maybe even making Dothan before dark tomorrow. I barely noticed the hot tar under my feet, or the arid blasts that flapped my coat when the cars went by. I was on my way to something better, I thought. When the lobby door opened, I sighed in ecstasy as the cool air hit me in the face. The lobby was dingy, and calling it so might even be charitable. The furniture was of the bus station variety, and there was a magazine sitting on one discussing the first term of Barack Obama. My daydreams about continental breakfast drifted away, and I approached the plexiglass booth that housed Eddie, I assume, with trepidation. Eddie was a middle-aged man, his thinning hair pulled back into a ponytail as his Pantera t-shirt struggled to contain him. Even through the glass, I thought he looked distinctly greasy, and he looked up from whatever he was watching on his laptop with some misgivings. "I ain't got any spare change, pal, and I don't let people just crash in my lobby." I rolled my eyes, this sermon being pretty common amongst people who've never lived rough. Actually, I was wondering if I could rent a room for the night. Eddie looked me over and his glower softened. "It's 30 a night. Checkouts at 10 a.m. Cash up front. No refunds for stains or bugs." He tapped the slot at the bottom of the plexiglass, indicating that I could drop my cash in there. I bent down and fished 220s out of my sock. They were wet with sweat, but money was money in this economy. 30 was a lot to pay for a few hours of respite from the heat, but the thought of sweating out in the woods for the night had changed my mind. Eddie grimaced at the wet bills, but he slid them under the counter and flopped a 10 and a room key back at me. "Take room 5. Don't forget, checkouts at 10 a.m. And don't steal my towels." Then he turned back to his laptop and forgot I existed. The room was somewhere between swanky and skanky. There was a bed with a sagging mattress and some sheets that were only slightly stained. A bathroom with a shower and a sad stained toilet, and a TV that looked like it had seen most of the Reagan administration. All in all, it was a shithole, but it was better than sleeping in the woods. The only thing I cared about was sitting under the big window, and when it started pumping out cold air at subarctic temperatures, I was glad that I had shelled out for the room. The shower was amazing, but it was also the first indication I got that something was off. I left my clothes on the floor and climbed into the hot deluge. My skin felt like I'd stepped into a heat bank for a few seconds, but it passed as the hot lava coursed down my scalp. How long had it been? How long had it been since I'd had a real shower? How long had it been since I'd stood in a real shower, slept in a real bed, watched TV, had it all to myself? My eyes snapped open, though, when I heard the click of nails on the linoleum. The rings of the Dollar General curtain almost screamed as I yanked it hard to the side. My first thought had been rats. This place was slummy enough to have them, but I didn't see anything. The floor was stained, but my clothes were the only thing on it. I looked at the door, but it was closed. No rat could have squeezed under that thing. I pulled the curtain back and had just started washing the day's sweat off of me when I heard it again. It was subtle, like claws on the lino, but when I looked at the curtain, I slammed hard against the cold plastic wall. My mind was trying to make sense of what I was seeing and coming up short. It couldn't be what I was looking at, but I couldn't find any other way to explain it. The curtain was crawling with something big, something that looked like beetles. They were scuttling over the curtain, 4, 5, 7, 8, and as I slid into the ringed basin of the tub, I started hyperventilating a little. They were scuttling, their feet making the same clicking as they had on the bathroom floor. I couldn't see their eyes, but I could feel them. They glared at me through the curtain as the steam clouded around them. As the water fell on my head, I gasped in pain as the shampoo I'd been working into my scalp ran into my eyes. I wiped at it, not wanting to lose track of the bugs, but as my vision cleared, I was looking at empty space and the gauzy film of the shower curtain. The bugs were gone, out of sight, but not out of mind. I searched the room, probably looking ridiculous in my old underoos, but I never found anything. Well, except for the stains on the mattress. They were a little hard to miss. I had gripped the mattress when I saw the old red stains on the side. If you've never seen old blood, then you may not realize what it looks like, but I'd seen my fair share on the farm. This was old blood, probably years old, and I made a mental note to sleep on top of the comforter that night. There were sheets on the bed, but you can only expect so much from fabric. I put my clothes back on and tried to make myself comfortable. It was hard. Those big bugs were still fresh in my mind, and as I lay on top of the sheet, I couldn't help but wonder where they had gotten off to. Were they waiting for me to turn off the light? Were they just sitting in the drain in the sink? As some movie played in the background, I found my eyes staring into the corners of the dingy room. The corners were dark, despite the lights being on, and I felt something lurking there. I fidgeted restlessly on the bed as something scrabbled over my leg. I couldn't find anything when I lifted it up, though. I was being paranoid. What did I care if the room had roaches or beetles or whatever? Hell, I often slept next to dumpsters or out in the woods. Just because these bugs had startled me didn't mean that they meant me harm, right? Despite my better judgment, I got under the covers and tried to get comfortable. The mattress was lumpy, but not too bad. There was a definite divot in the middle, though, a person-shaped indent worn from multiple bodies over multiple years. It seemed to be my only choice for sleeping locations. It wasn't a chasm or anything, but it had an uncomfortable dip on either side. I finally found myself giving up and lying in it, and as my eyes started to slip shut, I felt the bite. It wasn't hard, a little less than an ant bite, but it snapped me out of my semi-sleep and made me throw the covers back to look. I checked the bed, the sheets giving away nothing, and I couldn't find any ants or spiders or anything. I thought about bedbugs then, and I pulled my jeans back to look at my leg. It was nothing, a little red spot, but as I tried to settle in again, I felt another bite. It was followed by a third, a fourth, a fifth in seconds. I could feel something on my skin, little feet running up my legs, and the bites were painful. I rolled up my jeans and swatted at my legs, but there was nothing there. It was as though whatever had bitten me had just taken a chomp and left just as quick. I was back on the comforter in a flash, but the divot felt tainted. I sat to the left of it, shoulder against the wall as I put my back to the headboard, wishing I had just put up with the heat. I could just leave, I thought. This was America after all, and if I wanted to waste my money, then that was my business. The thought of going back out and sleeping in the woods, the heat falling over me like a blanket, was not at all appealing, though. I didn't like the thought of bugs crawling on me either, especially not bed bugs. Growing up, my parents had been fond of keeping dogs in the house, and I could remember spending nights with fleas crawling all over me as I sweated beneath my sheets. We had bed bugs a few times as well, and I remember the sleepless nights spent as they crawled and bit at me. It had led me to be very neat, something that persisted even into my homelessness, and it was almost funny that I hadn't felt truly dirty until coming inside somewhere for the night. It wasn't a big problem, though. Bugs didn't like cold, and I had the AC set on about 65. I could sleep on the comforter, avoid the worst of the bites, and still enjoy a nice cool evening indoors before returning to the heat tomorrow. When the power suddenly went out in my room, plunging me into darkness, I felt a small moan rise in my throat of its own will. I was left with nothing but my own breathing as I sat there on the saggy bed. The curtain window provided nothing but a ghostly inkling of a shadow light from the parking lot beyond. I crossed my arms around my chest as I began to shudder. The cold air hung around me like a cloud, but it would dissipate before long. Then, well, I might as well have just slept outside. The heat was oppressive, but at least the bugs were a little less forward. As I sat in the dark, I felt like I could hear the scuttling again. It was clicking, the noises scuttling across my brain. I looked around fretfully, trying to see where they were coming from. I wanted to run. I wanted to get the hell out of there, but I just couldn't make my legs move. My eyes were roving in a panic when I saw the comforter begin to flutter. The divot made a little canyon in the bedclothes, and I could see something squirming up from that hole. They were big, looking like beetles from a kid's cartoon, and they came staggering up from the crater as they ruffled the comforter. They spread out as they searched for me, and I felt my horror growing as the waves began to flow my way. They were like a squad of army ants, making their uniform patrol as they looked for prey, and they were coming towards me. I did the only thing I could think to do. I got up and made a run for the door. I made a grab for my pack, but my fingers slipped off the rawhide loop at the top. I paused in the doorway, turning back to grab it, and that's when I saw them. The bugs on the shower curtain had been babies compared to these bloodsuckers. They were as large as dogs, their amber bodies clicking as they moved, and their piss-yellow eyes full of hate. They came lumbering after me, their proboscises quivering with anticipation. I slammed the door as I left the bag to them. I had a fleeting thought that I had left the room key on the nightstand, but that hardly mattered. I wouldn't have gone in there for $200,000, much less the $200 in change that was left in my travel sack. That's how I ended up running up the interstate towards Dothan with nothing but the clothes on my back and $10 on my sock. I must have looked pretty silly, but I didn't care. I was glad to be out of there, glad to be in the muggy air again, happy to have escaped with my life. And when the man in the Farmall truck came and picked me up a half an hour later, driving me the rest of the way to Dothan, I was glad to be able to feel the breeze that ruffled my hair. It felt better than Eddie's air conditioning ever could. Whenever I get the wanderlust again, I just think back to that night 3 years ago, and I count myself lucky to have gotten out with my life. It turned out that Dothan was some of the things I had been looking for, and others I hadn't even thought about. I found work. I found a place to stay that wasn't a park bench. And when the farm I got hired to pick pecans at was out of pecans for the season, the farmer was already having me work on his books to get him and his finances back in order. I moved into a little rental on the land, and I'm glad to say that my wandering days are over for now. I put this story here as a warning to those who still wonder, though. Eddie's prices may seem like a good deal, but watch out for the things you get on top of the bed and the TV. Those bed bugs have teeth, and you may end up as just another stain on the mattress if you aren't careful.
One last story for you, and this one is a real doozy. We talk about a homeless guy who's turned his life around, a fella who's found his luck in a strange and unexpected way. So, be sure to tell me if it happens to you. I'd love to hear about your lucky bump.
It was the lowest point of my life, and I spent years thinking it was some kind of divine retribution. After last week, I know better. I would say it had been a hard year, but it had really been a hard 5 years. COVID knocked me out of a job that I really liked. Lack of a job meant I had defaulted on my mortgage, and I'd finally been forced to sell my pickup truck when I couldn't even afford gas. I was homeless for real then,
just wandering around and taking what I could get. And as the economy got a little better and the businesses started opening again, my lack of decent clothes held me back from much of anything besides day labor. I was stuck in a rut, and I didn't know how to get back out. Not until I met the guy in the three-piece suit. I was coming out of a convenience store as he went in, and when we bumped into each other, it felt like I'd been electrocuted. I'd been doing a little panhandling, not something that I'm proud of, and some nice lady had given me a 5-spot as long as I wouldn't spend it on the booze. $5 was enough for a slightly expired sandwich and a bottle of water, so I headed down to Enzo's, where I bumped into Mr. Suit Guy. He looked like a real business type, one of those guys who traded stocks or owned a company, and I nearly dropped my deli sandwich in my cold water as he slammed against me. I just figured he would bowl past me and keep going, but I was 3 or 4 steps out of the door when I felt eyes watching me. I turned back to find him looking at me in a thunderstruck way. I didn't like it. It was more than most people had seen. I felt seen in a way that I hadn't in years, like someone was finally looking at me and thinking more than effing bum, and it honestly felt a little nice, right up until he started yelling. Hey, get back here, you bumped into me. Get your ass back here and bump me again. I need it, But whatever else he was saying, I didn't hear. I started running, clutching my food and running flat out. I didn't know what this was about, but I knew that if the cops came by, they'd side with Mr. Gray Suit over a smelly bum any day. The guy chased me for a little over a block, shoving other people aside, too, as he kept yelling at me to come back and bump into him again. And it took me almost 10 minutes to lose him. When some cop came around out of a coffee shop on Melvin and the guy bumped into them, I made my way down a side street and finally got away. That had been weird, I reflected, but people usually treated the homeless like punching bags, so it wasn't out of the ordinary. I sat down to have my sandwich, and as I peeled back the wrapper, I reached for the mustard in my pocket. My fingers touched something else, though, and I pulled out not a mustard packet, but a scratch ticket. I didn't play scratchers. I didn't have the money to, so I was a little confused as to how it had come to be in my pocket. So I decided to scratch it. Why not? I hadn't stolen it, so I didn't need to feel bad about it. If the guy in the suit had dropped it in when he bumped me, then that was just tough for him. I started getting excited as I scratched the numbers, and when I finished the last box, the ticket almost slipped out of my hand. I had scratched off $1,000 on what amounted to a $2 ticket. I couldn't believe it. This kind of thing never happened to me. I had been living in a state of misfortune for so long that a little windfall seemed unfathomable. I took it to a different gas station to cash it in, not wanting to risk running into the man a second time, and the clerk told me how lucky I was as he cashed me out. He asked if I wanted another ticket, and after thinking about it, I decided that I might as well. There was no harm in playing another. It was only $2. I scratched it and felt my hands begin to shake. I'd won another $5,000. That was how it went after that. Whether I played dice in an alley or cards at a high-end casino, I won. Soon I was back on my feet, my luck with jobs turning around, and within a year, I was the owner of my own business. As I started to do well with my small-scale gambling, I let a coworker talk me into putting some money into cryptocurrency. I did so well with it that I started day trading, and when the GameSpot stock came up in conversation, I put my money in and cashed out at the peak. I also met someone at work, a woman with a young son who needed stability, and we decided to start a life together. I couldn't believe it. I had gone from living under park benches to owning my own home again and getting my life back on track. My business did well. My ventures always panned out. Everything I touched turned to gold. By the start of 2025, I was doing public outreach in the same areas where I'd once slept and begged for money. And that was how I came to see the man that I had bumped into again. I was walking around a soup kitchen, which I had recently taken on as a charitable venture, when I saw him eating with some of the other guys at the shelter. Life had clearly not been good to him since the last time we'd bumped into each other. He was haggard, his hair long and his clothes disheveled. The gray suit was long gone, and he looked as if many of the familiar bus terminals and underpass spots that I had slept in were now known to him. He looked up when he saw me, our eyes meeting, and I could see the recognition on his face. The spoon slipped out of his hand, his head following me as the manager of the shelter walked me around. And as I looked away, I could feel those eyes boring into me. I started seeing him more often after that. It seemed that some days, every door I opened, every sidewalk I went down, and every building that I had reason to visit, there he was. He seemed to be trying to bump into me, but I was always aware of my surroundings in a strange way I never had been before. Some of it was just not wanting to bump into people and make them angry, a trick I learned from when I was homeless, but some of it was just being aware of myself. I always managed to step out of his way or step to the side so he could go by, and every time it seemed to frustrate him. The day before things came to a head, saw him getting vocally angry with me when I opened the door to the bank for him instead of just crashing into him, and I was pretty confused as I watched him walk away. I was coming home late the next night when I found him sitting in my living room. My wife and son were out of town, a last-minute visit to her parents' house, and that would seem lucky too. I didn't have security for my penthouse home. I never felt like I needed it until I came home that evening to find him in it. I was tempted to step back out into the hallway and run, but the gun pointed at me was a pretty good deterrent. He told me to sit down, and I took a seat across from him. I couldn't tell you why, but it felt like the right thing to do. "You remember me?" he asked, and I nodded. "I bumped into you about 10 years ago, just about the time my luck changed." "Right, except it didn't change. You took my luck." I furrowed my brow. How was that even possible? He looked over my shoulder at a decanter of alcohol, scotch or bourbon or something, and said he was going to make a glass before starting. I told him to go ahead, and he held the gun on me as he poured out amber liquid and took a sip. He brought it back, not offering me one, and sat it down on the coffee table without a coaster. Jerk. I don't know how it started, but I got the luck from my uncle. He was a businessman, a compulsive gambler, and everything he touched seemed to turn to gold. He was lucky in life, lucky in love, and everything seemed to come up his way. I asked him once how he did it, and he told me it had just randomly happened one day. He'd been recently drafted into Vietnam, and he went to celebrate what would likely be the last time that he saw his friends. He bumped into a guy coming out of a bar. After that, his luck was insane. He never so much as took a bullet the whole war. Came home, invested in a used car lot in his hometown, and turned it around. Everything he touched turned to gold, and he could do no wrong. He told me that he believed it had been that guy he bumped into, and he wanted to test it by giving it to me. He'd never had any kids, always thought of me as the son that he never had. and he wanted to give me his luck as a graduation present. So, he bumped into me, just slammed his shoulder into me right there in the living room. And I was lucky after that. I was lucky right up until you stole it from me. After that night, everything changed. I got arrested for trying to get you. The cops said I was disturbing the peace, and when they took me in, I refused to stop long enough to talk to them. I stayed in jail for 6 months while they tried to figure out what to do with me. And the people I left to watch my business suddenly decided to take the money and run. I was destitute when I got out. My fiancée had drained my accounts. My friends wouldn't talk to me now that I was broke. I had nothing. I'd nearly forgotten about you, just chalked it up to bad luck. And that was when I saw you again. He took another long drink, smacked his lips, and went to get the decanter. He brought it back, not even bothering with the glass anymore, and seemed to enjoy sipping from the glass neck of the thing. You forget how nice things are when you're living rough. A nice bourbon, cigar on the balcony, a steak cooked just the way you want it. Anyway, after I saw you at the shelter, I knew I had to get my luck back. I kept trying to bump into you, but I think you'd figured out by then that the bump was how you'd gotten it in the first place. I was getting frustrated, not sure how to get you to give it back, and finally, I decided that this was the best way to go. So, he said, cocking the cheap little revolver, you're going to bump into me. You're going to give me my luck back. Then, I'm going to leave. You can call the police if you like. I'll have the luck, so I don't care. And if I don't? I asked, still sitting comfortably on my couch. He shrugged. Then I'll shoot you, and neither of us will have it. Either way, your turn with the luck is over. He was slurring a little by then, the alcohol taking effect, and I decided to trust in the luck and see if it would pan out. Then I guess you'll have to shoot me, I said, spreading my arms out and inviting him to take the shot. He looked mad. Asshole. I didn't want it to be like... But I never found out what he wanted it to be like. He seemed to have forgotten that the coffee table was there, and when his shin bumped into it, he fell forward and through the glass top. The gun fell out of his limp fingers, the alcohol spilling on the carpet, as he gurgled with the shards of the tabletop in his guts. He looked up at me, pleading for me to help him, but it was too late. I called the police, but it seemed my luck wasn't going to work for him. He was dead before they got there. The whole thing was written up as a home invasion gone wrong. The fella had a record, a lot of loitering and panhandling mostly, and they supposed that he had simply stepped up to the next means of getting a hot meal. I didn't tell them what we'd talked about. I figured it would only muddy the waters further. Now, however, I'm stuck with the idea that I might be able to transfer this luck. My son, who I adopted at the start of last year, is 10, so I've got a little time to figure it out. I've started putting money in accounts under my wife's name, just in case. If the luck means I have to lose what I've gained, then maybe I can set them up well enough that they can live comfortably, no matter what happens. If it's true, and I can transfer the luck, then maybe I'll give it to my son when he comes of age. Luck is a pretty good gift for a young man starting out in the world. Till then, I'll just have to be careful who I bump into. And just like that, our tales have come to an end for another day. But don't worry, I'll be back again very soon with more cozy horror for you to enjoy. Until then, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.